Hello everyone, it is Aussies Elect back yet again. Today this video is going to be about how the coalition can still win the 2022 Australian federal election. So we've got the coalition on 75, Labor on 69, Greens on 1, Centre Alliance 1, Palmer, Katter, Independent 3. Now, the couple of seats that most people are giving to the Labor Party are the seats of Swan and Pearce in WA, Boothby in South Australia, and Reid or Robertson in New South Wales. Reid is the one where they seem to be having a stronger chance. That Palmer seat is undoubtedly going back to the coalition or through an independent. And what's also interesting at the moment is it's likely that an independent at least one independent will win in either Victoria or New South Wales. So I'm just going to put an extra one in New South Wales at the moment, which leaves the coalition on 71 seats. So as for Queensland, there is an expectation that that could stay exactly the same, and there's an expectation in Victoria that that could also stay exactly the same. Chisholm, whilst Labor are targeting it pretty hard, you'd expect there'd be a couple of percentage swing points in Chisholm. There was a poll a while ago which gave the seat to the coalition, and the swing in Victoria is expected to be not very high. So I don't know. I don't think it's a done deal for Labor to win Chisholm, but I think Labor will probably win one of those two New South Wales seats. Now, the coalition has to get back 5 seats. How can they do this? The main prospect for them comes in the state of New South Wales. So let's have a look at some of these seats. So we have the seat of Macquarie. This is, I believe, the lowest margin in the country, 0.2%. Last election, there was a 2% swing to the Liberal Party away from Labor. If this repeats again, this will be a win for the Liberal Party. If we go to the seat of Eden Monaro, this was also, I believe, a swing to the Liberals, only slightly, but if the swing happened again, it would again be a win. Oh, well, actually, oh, I see, right. So the 0.4 was at a by-election. I see. Okay. So yeah, if that swing was repeated, that would be a win for the coalition based on the by-election. The seat of Hunter, margin of 3%. There was a 10% swing to the Nationals last election, and it's a seat that One Nation is also very competitive. Again, if this happened again, the Labor Party would lose that seat. We've got a seat of Gilmore, another really tight contest. This one actually had a swing to the Labor Party. I believe this was the only seat that the Labor Party picked up last election. But yeah, they had a bit of a swing towards them actually. But this is one that they're looking a bit threatened in. Then we've got the more inner city seats of Greenway, which had a 3.5% swing to the Liberal Party last election. Then we've got the seat of Parramatta, which had a 4% swing to the Liberal Party last election. Then we've got the seat of Dobell, which has a margin of 1.5%, which had a swing of 3.3% to the Liberal Party last election. And then we've got the seat of Shortland, has a margin of 4.4% and has had a swing of 5.5% to the Liberal Party last election. Then we've got Patterson, which has a margin of 5%, and there was a swing of 5.7% to the Liberal Party last election. Now, this only really kind of comes into play, and I believe there was a swing towards Labor in Richmond, so that's not one of the seats that we're talking about. This only really comes into play, of course, if you expect that there will be a swing as high as there was last election. The polls are not saying that. Both the national polls and the polls of New South Wales. We'll take a quick look at what the polls are saying in New South Wales. The only real polls that put the coalition sort of in a good position are the essential research polls. As you can see here, it has the coalition leading by 1 point on a two-party preferred in New South Wales. They've got a primary vote of 41, which is pretty healthy for them, and 33 for Labor, which is pretty low. So if this was repeated 48-47, it would indicate a margin of around 50.5% to the coalition, which would still be, I believe, about a 1% swing against them in New South Wales, which doesn't indicate that any of these seats are necessarily going to flip. And then if you look at some of the other polls from New South Wales, Roy Morgan, Labor massively ahead there. Resolve Strategic, Labor massively ahead on the primary vote, 41 to 30. You got Ipsos, Labor ahead 48 to 45 or 52 to 48. And then we got Roy Morgan again, 55 to 45. And then News Poll, I mean, it was a while ago. Where is it? I believe this was the most recent news poll. I had Labor ahead 54 to 46. So the polls are not indicating any significant swing towards the Liberal Party, and that's why probably, you know, if there was a swing indicated towards the Labor Party, I would say this would be pretty worrying for the Labor Party because of how many marginal seats they are. And what's interesting about all of these seats is these seats are all sort of the regions or the outer suburbs, and these are the seats that, like, I think the Labor Party should be worried about, given sort of the social conservative voters swinging towards the coalition this election. I mean, the coalition have, they failed on their religious discrimination bill, but they still have that sort of that reputation of being socially conservative. And when it comes to issues like climate change, seats like Hunter are not going to be siding with the Labor Party on issues like that. Joel Fitzgibbon's also retiring, which is, I think, what makes Hunter the most vulnerable seat for the Labor Party in the entire country. So, what can we say about New South Wales based on those observations? I think it's very likely that the coalition will win Hunter, and I think it's quite likely that they'll win probably one more seat, or maybe Gilmore. Well, that will put the independents on 2, and that will get the coalition up to 73. Right, where else can they make gains? So let's go back to the map on the poll budget and look at Queensland. So Queensland, massive swing to the coalition last election. All of these seats are vulnerable, basically, if there's a repeat of a swing of last election. Most people don't expect this to happen again, a swing of this much. Some of these seats actually swung to the Labor Party, like the seat of Griffith last election. Oxley, that would have definitely swung to Liberal Nationals, but not like a huge margin. So the seat of Blair, yeah, that was a bit of a swing, but and if that swing was repeated, they would lose that seat. So I've heard the one that the Labor Party are most concerned about is Lilly, and yeah, they're on a margin of 0.6% here. But yeah, I mean, it's again of a question about, is it possible for Queensland to swing even further to the coalition than they were last election? Labor's climate policy, which I think climate change issues is one thing that Queenslanders really, it gets under their skin. Labor's climate policy is arguably a bit more moderate than last time, but you could argue it's a bit less moderate because it does include forcing companies to pay for carbon credits, which the government has labeled a tax, even though they're already forcing people to pay carbon credits, so they've already got a carbon tax under their definition. But the people don't know that; they're just going to run with it, and that might affect Queensland voters. But I feel like climate change as an issue has kind of turned a corner in the last 3 years. Joe Biden got elected. There was that Glasgow summit. Climate change is seen more as a non-issue. It's seen more an issue that if you do have a sort of a strong-ish climate change policy, it's like sort of like the normal thing to do, which is I think why the Labor Party won't get particularly hit by the policy that they have. Also for the fact that the coalition can't campaign too much about it because they don't want to risk their inner city seats. Right, so let's just quickly once again have a look at opinion polls for Queensland and see what they're saying. So essential research actually kind of sticks out because I had the Labor Party massively ahead here for some reason. So Labor Party 49 to the coalition's 43. They're behind in the Roy Morgan poll by quite a lot, actually. It only indicates about a 2% swing to Labor. This one has the Labor Party behind by a decent amount as Resolve Strategic. This one has them at 50-50, which is an Ipsos poll, which is about an 8% swing to Labor. Roy Morgan, 54.5, that's about a 4% swing to Labor. Essential Research, once again, had Labor in front. And then if we go all the way up to the most recent news poll, it had the coalition, I believe, in front, 54 to 46. It is stated by a lot of people that the Queensland polls tend to overestimate the Labor Party. It's just a trend that's been going on. So these polls, which is showing an 8% swing, I don't think it's going to happen. But that is the reason why most people are not expecting Labor to necessarily make gains in the state of Queensland. I know they're looking at the seats of, I think, Brisbane, the seats of Leichhardt, and the seats of Longman, but it's questionable whether the Labor Party will win it. But it is also quite questionable if the coalition can pull off even more wins in Queensland. But like maybe Queensland is just really has a hard on for Scott Morrison. That's kind of what the idea was last election. I don't know. Clive Palmer isn't targeting Labor as heavily this time, so and well, especially he's not targeting Albanese as heavily as he was targeting Bill Shorten. So I think I don't think it's appropriate really to um, put on gains for either party in Queensland. But I mean, you could say that perhaps the coalition might win one more seat. They might win Lily, and I think that's relatively fair. So we can do that. Um, Now onto Northern Territory. I don't want to talk about this too long because I don't really have too much information about this. Polling is not very good, but most people are expecting that Labor are probably going to keep these seats, but there is sort of the odd one out that's stating that maybe the coalition might win the seat of Lingiari. So I'll give it to them. Um, Tasmania, the seat of Lions. I'm actually kind of curious about the seat of Lions. I'm not exactly sure what happened there last election. So let's take a look. See, right, so this is the seat of Lions. So there was actually a bit of a swing to Labor, and they've got a margin of 5.2%. So Tasmania is also one of those places where polling doesn't seem to ever be particularly great. But there was some polling last election which had the coalition ahead in Bass, and they actually won the seat. So maybe it's not too bad, but it's never included in like there is some poll data in for Tasmania. But it's nobody ever really takes it that seriously. This one has 57.5 Labor ahead. This one has 56 ahead. This one has them 65 ahead. So I don't know about Lions. Like it could really go either way. I would say it would probably stick with the Labor Party, and I still think that the Labor Party probably have a chance of picking up one of those other two Tasmanian seats, which are Bass and Braddon. So like I don't know. I don't think it's really a great idea to give this seat to the coalition because I just think that even if they win the seat, they could lose one of the other two Tasmanian seats. There's no strong indication that the coalition are going to gain. South Australia, coalition aren't going to gain anything there. That's just not happening. Western Australia, I don't think the coalition will gain Cowan, which is the most marginal seat in Western Australia. I think the swing is going to be two, and also Labor got a swing towards them last time as well. But there's going to be a swing towards Labor in Western Australia, and I just don't think that the coalition can pull that one off. Right, so the last state we have to talk about is Victoria. Victoria, there's three key seats which the bookies are kind of looking at as possible coalition wins. We've got the seat of McEwen, which was a swing to the Liberal last time, but it was only a 1% swing. We've got the seat of Dunkley, which I got an indication from someone from Twitter recently that the coalition were ahead in a poll in Dunkley. It's got a margin of 2.7%, but there was a poll ages ago which had the Labor Party ahead 60-40. And this was also a seat where it swung towards Labor last election. So I mean, it is an outer suburban seat, so that's why people are thinking like the Catherine Deves vote is going to help it. And then we got the seat of Corangamite, which is I think it's near Geelong, and that was again a swing to Labor Party last election, and it's got a margin of 1.1%. But there's another seat that the coalition are targeting. As for the seat of Chisholm, which is the one they have to worry about, I believe I talked about this earlier. It is a sort of an inner city. Well, I mean, I don't see any reason why the coalition won't lose this seat. To be honest, like Gladys Liu is not a good candidate, and the Labor Party have been attacking her pretty hard. So um, we could maybe see the coalition barely scrape in Chisholm, and they might pick up one more seat. Rightio, so yeah, this is what we'll look like. So I think this will be pretty difficult for the coalition to achieve at this point in time. My suspicion is that probably the coalition at this point in time, the best they can do is a minority government. Polls could be wrong again. I don't think the polls are going to be wrong again, personally. I think the polls have been pretty good recently. I think they made up for the mistakes that they had back in 2019. But yeah, like I think the key to the coalition's success is New South Wales, undoubtedly. They need to pick up a bunch of seats in New South Wales, marginal seats of the Labor Party. Whether they can do it, I don't know. The New South Wales Liberal Party currently hates Scott Morrison, and they're also threatened in North Sydney. They're threatened in Wentworth. They're threatened in Mackellar, which is diverting a lot of resources away from fighting those targeted marginal seats in New South Wales. The most possible seats, in my opinion, for the coalition to win in New South Wales are the seats of Greenway and Hunter, and I don't expect them to get much further than that. But there's so many like really ultra marginal seats in New South Wales that it could go either way. There could be just a surprise vote for Scott Morrison that we haven't heard of. It could be that those opinion polls, it does have Labor ahead in New South Wales, but ahead in places which won't help them, like safe Labor seats or safe coalition seats. Like if they pick up a 10% swing in Barara, like that's not going to help them, even if it's a 10% swing. So if the Labor Party, what I'm talking about, they actually got a swing towards them in Barara last election, which is not really a surprise. So yeah, it could just be that the polls are good in areas which won't actually help Labor, and that might end up helping the coalition. But we're still waiting for a lot more seat by seat polls. We haven't got money, so all we can really do is just hypothesize based on the state polls that we've gotten. And at the moment, it's not looking like the coalition are going to pick up the seats in New South Wales that they need, but it's definitely what they're targeting. I don't see much. I don't see much to do in Victoria. I don't see much to do in South Australia, Western Australia, Queensland, Tasmania, maybe Northern Territory. I think, in my opinion, it all comes down to New South Wales, and unfortunately, that's where the Prime Minister has got himself a bad name with his own political party. So I don't know how much that will affect things. It might just save Labor's ass this election. We'll see.